The 1989 Alaskan tree god mystery, a chilling, untold encounter. In the remote, snow-laden wilderness of Alaska, where dense spruce forests swallow sound and mountains rise like ancient guardians, few stories linger as hauntingly as the 1989 Alaskan tree god mystery. A chilling encounter whispered among bush pilots, park rangers, and the tight-knit indigenous communities that call the region home. This story, drawn from scattered reports, oral histories, and later interviews collected by small regional newspapers, describes an encounter so strange and so unsettling that even today it stands on the blurry line between folklore and fact, sparking debates across online forums, paranormal channels, and true crime research groups who wonder whether what happened in those woods was myth, misinterpretation, or something that defies easy classification. According to accounts from that winter, a group of 3 loggers working near the edge of the Tongass National Forest began reporting eerie disturbances. Unusual echoing calls not known to local wildlife, trees marked with deep spiral carvings, and what they described as the sensation of being observed by something tall, older than the forest itself. At first, these claims were dismissed as stress or isolation, but several nearby trappers later mentioned hearing the same guttural calls, suggesting that something larger was moving through the timberline during those frigid months. The heart of the mystery began on January 14, 1989, when one of the loggers, identified in early reports only as RB, claimed to witness a massive humanoid figure near the tree line, something he described as towering, bark-skinned, and partially camouflaged against the spruce trunks. While no official documentation from that period confirms his sighting, a regional newspaper archived in 1990 does reference anonymous accounts of a forest spirit, along with notes from a wildlife biologist who suggested the men may have misidentified a bear suffering from severe mange. Yet those who knew RB insisted he was a lifelong hunter, familiar with local fauna, and unlikely to mistake a bear for something so unusual. He described the creature's movement as slow, almost ritualistic, as if it were deliberately circling the worksite, leaving behind a faint but rhythmic knocking sound that seemed to echo through the trees. Indigenous Tlingit elders later remarked that this description resembled the ancient Kilut Yeth, sometimes referred to loosely in English retellings as a tree guardian spirit, though they emphasize that popularized versions of the legend tend to exaggerate and distort its traditional meaning. Some folklorists believe this connection was misunderstood by outsiders, while others argue it reflects deeper cultural knowledge about rare forest phenomena. As the logging crew grew increasingly uneasy, strange events escalated. Tools went missing, only to be discovered wedged high into branches where no human could easily reach. Fresh tracks appeared after new snowfall, resembling elongated footprints with branching impressions around the heels. The wildlife trackers later suggested that melting and refreezing snow can distort ordinary footprints, but the loggers insisted these prints remained consistent over several days, and that they sometimes formed in a straight line, as if a single weight were shifting from step to step rather than a creature walking with natural gait. Reports collected by amateur investigators around the early 2000s point out that certain Arctic animals like the lynx or fox can leave linear prints when bounding through snow, though neither species would have left the deep, human-sized impressions described in the 1989 accounts. Still, skepticism persisted, especially among Forest Service employees who argued that fear and isolation can dramatically influence perception during harsh winter conditions. The most unsettling event occurred on night of February 2nd, when the crew claimed that the knocking sound intensified, echoing in patterns, 3 slow knocks, followed by 2 rapid ones. Some researchers who studied the recordings years later suggested the men may have been hearing tree knocking caused by extreme temperature shifts, which are known to make large spruce trunks expand and contract with loud percussive pops. However, the loggers insisted that the knocks were deliberate and rhythmic, seeming to respond to their own noises, as though the forest itself were communicating. One witness described how the trees seemed to sway even though there was no wind, and how the air felt thick and electrified, as if a storm were forming overhead even though the night sky was crystal clear. Events culminated when R.B. reported seeing the same towering figure again, this time emerging partially from behind a massive spruce. He described its head as elongated, its eyes dark like burnt resin, and its body covered in what resembled overlapping plates of bark. When he shouted in panic, the creature stepped backward and blended almost seamlessly into the trunk, disappearing from sight. According to his account, it did not run. It simply ceased to be visible, as though it had merged with the tree itself. Skeptics have since suggested that this may have been a stress-induced hallucination, while others argue that the combination of moonlight, snow glare, and adrenaline can easily distort shadows into humanoid shapes. The next morning, the campsite was found in chaos. The fire pit had been scattered, gear overturned, and the spiral carvings, once subtle, now appeared freshly carved onto several nearby trees. Forestry officials later examined photographs taken by the crew, and one retired ranger, interviewed in 2009, suggested that the marks resembled vandalism done with chisels or hatchets, possibly by someone attempting to intimidate the workers. Still, he admitted the height of some carvings, nearly 12 feet off the ground, would have required ladders or climbing equipment, none of which were found at the site. Fearing for their safety, the loggers abandoned the operation and left the area within hours. When investigators visited the site days later, most signs, prints, disturbances, and markings had been partially erased by snowfall. What remained were only faint impressions and a few photographs that, according to experts, are too unclear to allow firm conclusions. Over the next several years, the story circulated quietly among Alaskans as an eerie campfire tale, until a small documentary crew attempted to revisit the site in 1998. According to their production notes, they found no physical evidence, but interviewed several locals who recalled hearing stories about the forest shadow long before 1989. One elder explained that certain parts of the forest were traditionally avoided, not because of monsters, but because dense, static-charged trees can cause disorientation and sensory distortions during winter months. This explanation aligns with the views of several environmental scientists who argue that electromagnetic anomalies, combined with infrasound generated by shifting ice, could create sensations of unease, panic, or even visual hallucinations. Yet believers in the paranormal point out that such natural explanations fail to address the carved symbols, footprints, and synchronized knocking described by the men. The documentary ultimately concluded that the mystery remains unresolved, not proven, not debunked, but suspended somewhere in the vast realm of Alaska's uncharted wilderness. In recent years, the story has resurfaced on social media, drawing renewed interest from explorers and cryptid researchers who compare the 1989 accounts to descriptions of forest spirits from various indigenous traditions around the world. Some argue that similarities across cultures point to psychological archetypes, while others believe they hint at real, undocumented species adapted to deep forest environments. A few modern theories even suggest that the tree god may be linked to aggressive fungal growths or natural camouflage systems seen in certain insects, ideas that scientists caution remain purely speculative and unsupported by evidence. Despite these debates, the 1989 Alaskan tree god mystery continues to capture the imagination,
not because it offers clear answers, but because it raises questions about what might still exist in remote corners of our world where human presence is fleeting and nature reigns with ancient, unbroken authority. The story endures partly because those who reported it never sought fame or sensational attention. Instead, they spoke reluctantly, often anonymously, describing an experience that left them shaken and uncertain. Their accounts, though unverified, reflect the very real psychological effects of isolation, wilderness, and the primal fear that can arise when we encounter something we cannot immediately categorize. For viewers drawn to the unknown, this mystery serves as a reminder that even in our modern age of satellite imagery and scientific mapping, vast regions of our world remain wild, enigmatic, and deeply mysterious. And perhaps that is why this tale endures, because in the quiet of the Alaskan night, where the wind whispers through ancient spruce branches, we are reminded that the world still holds secrets older than memory, waiting patiently in the shadows for curious minds willing to look